Yeah, but this is a Malaysia. You say the Malaysia.
This is what he said in the speech. I have it somewhere, and I'll fax it to you.
Yeah, you know, I mean, if you're really following developments in Albania, you have to look at the whole picture for the 4 years. What has been the model?
All I know is today there's a parliament. There's 122 members of Berisha's party and 7 from other parties. Okay? Where does that exist in any other country? Okay? Democratic country, really democratic country. I mean, the election.
I don't disagree with you.
He was stupid. He could have won. He would have won anyway. I mean, I don't disagree that he would have won. He would have won anyway. Because I know from my own people, a lot of Greeks would have won. Because if you give them a choice between the communists, there is real problem. In the north and west. And we could easily resolve all these problems. But what am I asking with my speech? You know, a few churches to be sent back, a handful of schools to be opened, you know, some representation in the appointed positions, or the police, or judges, or then have been thrown out. That's all I'm asking.
What never made sense.
Is that hard to accomplish?
But don't you think they are on the way to solve it?
I haven't, for example, he hasn't done it. He's agreed to open 3 schools. He closed 7 schools, agreed to open 3. The first grade of 3, it's going to take 8 years to just get a grammar school. Okay? They want, for the schools, for each class, minimum of 32 students. Hungary and Romania, 15. There's another one. 32. Both have to prove that they both their parents, the student has to prove that both their parents agree. What about mixed marriage?
Yeah.
And why should they have to prove it?
Right.
Somebody takes English,
Yeah.
they have to prove that the ethnic tie to the English. But nobody, and I told Genspoller, I have no special brief against the issue. I was very close to the society. I advised Mr. Dakis to help the issue. Dakis gave him a lot of material help. I believe
Become a terrorist over there.
suddenly I'm a terrorist. Okay, but the reason I do this is because the best cookies downstairs. You have to mark and bring in a package downstairs in the carry out. Then minorities.
That's my home number.
Okay, let me get my.
Yeah, you can budget. How are you?
I'll tell you the whole. So I had nice to talk to your brother yesterday.
Oh, good.
That guy has a lot of charm. I enjoyed talking with him very much. Yeah, and having him and Ron together in one room.
Oh, what a compliment.
So, you're okay?
I'm okay.
Yeah, I'd love to, because I called you before I left.
Yes.
Anyway, I would love to speak with you on my show.
Are you going to be here around tomorrow?
But in the afternoon, I am around.
It's a bit late yesterday, but what are you?
I did.
What's up, guy?
Right.
Here.
Feeling we're just
What about Albania?
Joe.
No? You're bad.
right here.
I've been here 6 months. If you want to move yourself a little farther over this way, closer, that's the reason why. Then we can back. I have my name playing here.
You have it?
Yeah, I have it. Okay, well,
Yes.
Delayed at the White House. I
saved
Aren't you glad?
Anyone from the embassy here? Must have somebody. I'm sure they must have somebody.
Today, among the most important tests of our commitment to human rights is whether we are prepared to defend these fundamental rights even when it seems inconvenient or impolite to do so. During the Cold War, American conservatives were often accused of deploring human rights violations by Marxist-Leninist regimes while ignoring similar violations by right-wing dictatorships. During the same period, some on the American left seemed to find violations of human rights more objectionable, or at least more noticeable, when they occurred in Chile and South America, and when they occurred in Cuba, China, or even Pol Pot's India. I believe that the human rights community has made some progress since then. All of us, liberals and conservatives alike, have come to recognize that bullets are just as lethal and torture just as degrading, and they come from people whose economic and social views are generally those that we can endorse, as well as those that we oppose. Still, it can be tempting to explain away evidence of human rights violations when they are alleged to have been perpetrated by governments we are inclined to regard as friends. To overcome this temptation and to hold our friends to the same standards as our foes, it is a solemn obligation, I believe. By any measure, Albania is a country that we should regard as a friend. In 1991, this nation suddenly emerged from over 40 years of the most brutal Stalinist dictatorship. In practically no time, it had become a country in which people have the right to vote, to speak, to publish, to practice their respective religions, and even to buy and sell their goods and labor on the free market. The United States and its allies in the free world regarded Albania in many ways as a model for other nations emerging from dictatorship. Recent events have cast substantial doubt on this assessment, however. In September of 1995, President Salih Berisha removed the chief judge of the Court of Cassation, the highest court in Albania, shortly after the court had issued a series of decisions adverse to the government. Some of these decisions concern members of the ethnic Greek minority population in Albania. The removal of the Chief Justice appeared to violate the Albanian Constitution, but so far this action has been allowed to stand. Then, in the period before May of 1996 parliamentary elections, the government took a number of steps which were characterized both by opposition parties and by internal observers as attempts to manipulate the upcoming election. These included a new election commission, all of whose 7 members were government supporters, laws which excluded many opposition candidates from eligibility for office, and the arrest and/or harassment of many journalists and opposition leaders. Much of the opposition boycotted the election, and supporters of the government won 87% of the seats in Parliament. Finally, on May 27th, opposition parties organized a demonstration to protest the alleged electoral irregularities. The demonstration was broken up forcibly by police, and many demonstrators, including some prominent opposition leaders, suffered severe injuries. Defenders of the Berisha government have pointed out to exit polls showing that the party probably would have won the election even if there had been no irregularities. They also suggest that the withdrawal of some of the opposition parties on the day of the election was a tacit acknowledgement of the government's popularity, and the allegations of systematic abuse of the Greek minority are greatly exaggerated. Today we will hear the United States government's official assessment of these arguments. We have also assembled a panel of 6 expert witnesses representing a wide range of viewpoints and perspectives on these problems. On behalf of the subcommittee, I want to welcome our witnesses and thank you in advance for the insights that you will provide. At this point, I would like to recognize the distinguished chairman of the full committee, Mr. Gilman of New York, and after that, Mr. King. And Mr. Gilman will take the chair at this time. Gilman.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Smith, and I want to commend the Chairman for holding today's hearings on democracy and human rights in Albania. I think it's necessary at the outset of our proceedings to emphasize the respect we accord the people of Albania for the progress they've made since 1991, when they succeeded in overthrowing one of the most repressive and regressive Stalinist regimes ever seen in Europe. And I want to especially highlight the role played by President Berisha since coming into office in 1992 in the first free elections held in Albania in jump-starting Albania's economy, then one of the most backward in the world, and making it now one of the fastest growing in Europe. President Berisha has also taken dramatic steps to improve U.S.-Albanian ties, which had completely atrophied for the past 50 years. Albania's willingness to host our military forces and its enthusiasm for our nation in general should not be gainsaid. It's for these reasons that what occurred in the period leading up to the national elections held in May and the immediate aftermath of those elections is extremely distressing to myself and to members of our committee who share the Chairman's commitment to human rights in the democratic process. I hope that this hearing will be able to establish a few basic facts about the recent elections. These should include that elections where all Albanians could vote to elect representatives from a wide range of political perspectives were scheduled and held, and that there are many allegations of abuses of the process by the ruling Democratic Party of President Berisha. Too many and too widespread to be simply discounted. That virtually all the major opposition parties withdrew from the elections just as they were about to be held, and that the Albanian authorities brutally suppressed demonstrations protesting the manner in which the elections were conducted. It's also a fact that the International Republican Institute, which had observers in place, conducted exit polls indicating that the Democratic Party received somewhere between 56 to 60% of the votes, a result that indicates that the DP could have won the elections fairly without resorting to any of the abuses and irregularities that had been alleged. The institutions and practice of democracy need to be encouraged and nurtured. Democracy does not simply consist of conducting a ballot and counting the results. In Albania, as elsewhere in the former communist countries of Europe, we are discovering that instilling respect for full and true democracy is a difficult and long process requiring patience and persistence. And while we may criticize Albania's latest attempt to move down the road of democracy, it would be a mistake in my judgment to conclude that its present government is incapable of fulfilling at least some of our hopes and expectations. President Berisha understands the difference between tyranny and a free society, and I believe him to be committed to leading his country to the road of freedom. That road may be bumpy and twisted, and we'll need to constantly remind all Albanians what democracy means and what it requires. A key argument which we can make in that regard is that democracy and the enjoyment of basic human rights is inextricably linked. Without human rights, there can be no democracy, and a key human right is the ability to freely select the individuals who govern. When those individuals fail to respect and protect the enjoyment of human rights, the electorate has a right to replace them with others who will. Many of the witnesses appearing today are friends from whom I've received much information regarding human rights and the situation in the Balkans over the past few years. And it's a pleasure for me to welcome them to this hearing, and we look forward to the expert analysis that they can provide. I'll be pleased to yield to my colleague, Mr. King, the gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I don't have any opening statement. I just want to commend Chairman Smith and you for holding this hearing. Obviously, the situation of democracy, the growth of democracy in Albania is a very important issue for this country. and indeed for the European people, and I look forward to the testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. Our first witness today is Rudolph Perina, who assumed the duties of Senior Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European and Canadian Affairs in February of 1996. From 1993 to 1996, Mr. Perina was Chief of Mission of the U.S. Embassy in Belgrade. Mr. Perina joined the State Department in 1974 and has specialized in Russian, East European, German, and NATO affairs. Mr. Perina, we welcome you to the committee. You may put in your full statement, you may put it in the record and summarize it, whichever you may seem to be of best to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity to appear before the committee and discuss the human rights situation in Albania. This is a particularly timely moment for this hearing, given the concerns expressed internationally and within Albania about the May parliamentary elections. With your permission, I will submit a statement for the record and provide a brief oral summary of this statement. I would like to begin with a few words about the historical context behind recent developments. Then I will address the flawed parliamentary elections and other concerns we have on human rights. Finally, I would like to describe the efforts the United States government is making to overcome these difficulties and to encourage Albania toward healthy, multi-party democracy and the rule of law. Mr. Chairman, as you know, Albania suffered for 45 years under Europe's most brutal communist regime. In 1991, hundreds of thousands of cheering Albanians rallied in Tirana on the occasion of the first visit to their country of a United States Secretary of State. They wanted the totalitarian nightmare to end. President Berish's Democratic Party government instituted bold economic reforms, a radical military reorganization, complete redistribution of agricultural land, wholesale privatization, and liberal investment laws. The U.S. was a major supporter of post-communist Albania. Since 1991, the United States government has provided over $200 million to support Albania's political and economic transition. Given that record of support, it is with great regret that the United States has taken note of the serious setbacks to this young democracy in recent months. In particular, we are acutely disappointed that the parliamentary elections held in May were conducted in a fashion which weakened, rather than strengthened, confidence in Albanian institutions. The serious irregularities which marred the elections and the government's failure to take adequate measures to correct them cast a shadow on the prospects for democratic progress, which remains the cornerstone of our relationship with Albania. The judicial system has also experienced disturbing setbacks. The most serious was the unconstitutional sacking of the Chief Justice of the Court of Cassation in September 1995. Although the government has undertaken some judicial reforms, the judiciary remains dominated by the executive. As regards the ethnic Greek minority, there has been some progress toward addressing its aspirations for greater access to Greek language education and the return of church properties expropriated by the previous communist regime. We are staying in contact with representatives of the Greek minority and will continue to watch developments in this area closely. Mr. Chairman, let me turn now to what we are doing to address the political situation in the wake of the elections, which is at the top of our agenda. From the first reports of election observers to this day, we have made clear, both publicly and privately, our great concern about this backward step for the process of democratization. Multilaterally, our diplomatic efforts have focused on enlisting our European Union friends and OSCE partners in a joint effort to establish an international mechanism for investigating irregularities and recommending corrective actions. Bilaterally, we have underscored our concerns to both the Albanian government and the opposition and made clear that future good relations with the United States depend on Albania's overcoming this setback. While only Albanians can decide on the particular steps which need to be taken to further political consensus and reconciliation, we believe the following issues must be addressed. First, political dialogue. Political parties should strive to reach agreement on ground rules for upcoming local elections, promulgating a constitution, and holding new parliamentary elections. We expect both the government and the opposition to take real steps toward reconciliation. Secondly, local elections. It is important that these be free and fair and monitored by local and international observers. A broad spectrum of Albanian political opinion must have a say in preparing for the elections. Thirdly, constitution. A democratic constitution which promotes consensus is needed. To ensure broad-based support, one approach would be election of a constituent assembly which would draft a constitution to be approved by referendum. Finally, new parliamentary elections. These remain a pressing requirement to promote political reconciliation and restore the faith of the Albanian people and the international community in Albanian democracy. One way to address this would be to hold new elections based on a new constitution. The government and opposition parties have agreed to hold local elections during the last 2 Sundays in October. The United States will encourage a strong international observer presence at those elections. We welcome the dialogue that the Democratic and Socialist parties have opened and hope that it is broadened to include other parties and that it leads to effective cooperation on steps to surmount the present political impasse. Mr. Chairman, relations between the United States and Albania have evolved in recent years on the basis of Albania's respect for democracy and human rights. The United States hopes that government as well as opposition political leaders will remain committed to this course. At this time, however, when the foundation on which U.S.-Albanian relations have rested has weakened, we are initiating a thorough review of our relationship, a review which includes our assistance programs. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my oral summary of my statement. I would be pleased to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
This time I'm going to ask if Mr. Lantos has any opening comments.
I do, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for holding this very important hearing. I've had a long-standing and very positive relationship with the Albanian ethnic community, principally in Kosovo, but also elsewhere. And as you know, Mr. Chairman, after almost a half a century of a hiatus, I was the first American public official to visit Albania, still under the old regime. I must say that your statement, Ms. Secretary, strikes me as incredibly gentle and overly diplomatic. What the Berisha regimes demand, what the Berisha regime demands of the United States, and it will get it from the Congress, and I'm sure it will get it from the administration, is unqualified outrage. You use the word regret in your prepared statement, which I don't think is anywhere near strong enough. I visited Albania just a short while ago.
I was subjected, as a member of Congress, to the most outrageous police surveillance. I was subjected to having the automobile in which I traveled repeatedly stopped, the driver threatened, and I had a singularly distinguished American citizen of Greek ancestry who was going to visit with me. The author, Nicholas Gage, prevented from entering Albania. I find the Berisha regime totally reprehensible, and I will commence a move in this Congress to suspend all aid until new elections are held and the human rights condition undergoes a dramatic change. The American people are not going to spend $200 million on Albania to have Albanians of Greek origin persecuted and discriminated against. As the founding Democratic co-chairman, and I think I can speak for my Republican co-chairman, John Porter, who has been the leader on this issue in the Congress, we have seen human rights violations in many countries in many forms. What we are seeing in Albania today is an outrage. A few miles into Albania, coming in from Greece, I was witness to a site that could be associated with Hitler's Germany, a brand new elementary school built by the community of an Albanian Greek village was burned to the ground. I talked to scores of Albanian Greek citizens who are terrified. They get no help from the police, they have no judges. They're living as second-class citizens subject to preposterous persecution. As one who went to Kosovo and was greeted in Pristina with the accolades of the ethnic Albanian community which was persecuted by the Serbs, I saw the exact same situation in Albania. I think it's extremely important that this Congress, despite the fact that this is an election season and we are all preoccupied, give this issue the attention that it deserves. I think the Albanian ethnic population deserves our maximum support both in Kosovo and in Macedonia. But I think the Albanian government of Berisha deserves our unqualified condemnation. And I find it incomprehensible that the State Department has not taken the initiative in cutting off aid until new elections are held and until the human rights conditions of the persecuted Greek minority are dramatically changed. I find it always distressing that the impetus has to come from Congress. It never comes from the State Department. In the case of Kosovo, those Albanians were persecuted, discriminated against, physically beaten, and the State Department did nothing until we insisted that improvements take place. The exact same situation is now unfolding in Albania. If we don't have leverage vis-à-vis the Berisha regime, I don't know vis-à-vis what regime we will have leverage. So I would like to announce, Mr. Chairman, that with colleagues across the political spectrum, I am initiating within the next few days a letter to the Secretary of the State requesting, demanding that aid be suspended, except in the case of ongoing humanitarian projects involving local communities. And the Albanian government be advised that we will not see the re-establishment of a totalitarian and non-democratic regime following the collapse of the Soviet Empire and following the collapse of the previous Albanian government. Whatever tendencies Berisha has along autocratic, authoritarian lines will have to be reined in. I also must say, Ms. Secretary, that our chargé d'affaires with whom I met in Tirana in my judgment, suffers from an extremely acute case of clientitis. Instead of being outraged at my report, his attempt was to whitewash and to minimize the human rights violations that the Greek Albanian community is subjected to and the indignities that a member of Congress was subjected to. I also have not yet seen any State Department action demanding that American citizens have every right to visit Albania when they choose to do so, carrying a valid U.S. passport. We are not going back to the Stalin days where it was possible to exclude people whom the local government did not like from visiting a country. This is simply unacceptable. And I think the State Department did not cover itself with glory with its singularly timid, incomprehensibly weak posture in dealing with the Berisha regime. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lantos. Mr. Salmon? Mr. Perina, you have stated that the Albanian government should be addressing the question of political dialogue with other parties as well as the question of free and fair local elections. Is it accurate that a dialogue has begun and that the socialists, among other opposition parties, agree that these will be a chance for Albania to restore its democratic credentials?
Yes, sir. It is accurate to say that there has been a limited dialogue which has started. Recently, there was, under the sponsorship of the Council of Europe, there was a type of round table held between the Democratic Party and the Socialist Party. I stress that this is only one of the opposition parties, the main opposition party, but not the only one. The dialogue at this stage, from the reports we have gotten, concerned largely the upcoming municipal local elections in October. But we do hope, perhaps it is a beginning, and we hope it can be expanded, and that it might be a first step in trying to bring about some process of national reconciliation.
Can you tell us what reason the Albanian government gave for refusing to receive a high-level delegation from our government? Did Berisha object to the delegation itself or the terms with which he'd have to meet with them? Was his objection justified?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the formal reason was simply that the President, Berisha, would be unavailable to meet with this delegation because of his commitments and schedule. Of course, we were disappointed with this response.
Albania recently rebuffed a proposal by the OSCE chair in office to send a personal representative. Did the Albanian government object to that proposal or the named representative?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Albania recently rebuffed a proposal by the chair of the OSCE to send a personal representative. Did the Albanian government object to that proposal or to the named representative?
I believe it was to the proposal. It was in general to the proposal rather than the representative. The representative at that time was not still clearly identified.
Well, is it a justifiable rejection, do you think?
No, we have strongly encouraged the Albanian government to interact constructively with the international community in trying to resolve the problems stemming from these elections, and indeed to take advantage of the assistance which is being offered by the international community in trying to resolve this problem.
Some of the defenders of the Albanian government stated that the opposition parties saw they could not win the May election and therefore exaggerated the reports of irregularities. How did you assess those kind of allegations?
Well, we have, in an event such as this, there are always aspects and different perspectives that one hears. We have really not seen any evidence of this. I, of course, could not rule it out that there was such an emotion or such a tendency at work. What we did see, regrettably, though, were many instances of concrete irregularities in the voting procedure, which in the first instance are the responsibility of the government which is running the elections.
Mr. Perino, what can our nation do to prevent Albania from sliding back into a dictatorship type of government?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think we can do several things, which I have tried to indicate in my statement. We need to make clear to the Albanian government that this is a very serious situation from our perspective, that this is not a problem which will go away without President Berisha dealing with it, that it is a problem he has to deal with. Secondly, we should work with our allies. We are not unique in having this viewpoint on the elections. By and large, most of the Europeans, most of our allies share this view. We should seek to make sure that this is a position that the Albanian government hears not only from us, but from all other members of the international community. But thirdly, I would say, if our objective is not to allow the Albanian government to slip into a new form of dictatorship, that we should keep in mind that our objective is not at this point to isolate this government from the international community, to fully cut off relations with it, and to cut off our dialogue with it. This is, after all, a government which, this is a country which has a long, lamentable, and historically documented tradition of isolating itself from the international community during periods of tension, and these are the times when the greatest human rights abuses have occurred. So I think we want to keep the Albanian government engaged, but make clear to it that this is a serious problem and that they have to deal with this problem, and that this has affected the relationship with the United States and will affect the relationship until it's dealt with in some way.
Mr. Perino, with regard to engagement, how can we make sure that that engagement is going to be constructive and will provide for some genuine progress?
Well, I think it is the nature of the firmness of the message we get across, and we are, I think, getting some fairly firm messages to the Albanian government. There have been communications at a fairly high level to President Berisha and to the foreign minister. We will continue doing this, but as I stress it, we need to walk a certain fine line here, I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, which makes unmistakably clear our concern about this situation and the need to remedy it without offering the incentive for self-isolation on the part of Albania and on the part of the Albanian government.
Thank you. Mr. Lantos?
Well, I just would like to comment for the record, Mr. Chairman, that nobody is advocating isolating Albania. What those of us who are critical of the Berisha regime are advocating is for the government of the United States, the worldwide champion of free and democratic societies, to express itself more forcefully and more effectively than it has in recent months. That's the issue, Ms. Secretary. So don't set up a straw man and knock him down. No one is advocating isolation or self-isolation. What we are calling for is a much heavier involvement of our government along lines of strengthening democratic forces and persecuted ethnic and religious minorities. That's all we are saying. Self-isolation or imposed isolation has not been recommended by any member of this panel, and I think it's important for you to understand that. I also think it's very important to realize, and I would like you to answer this question, don't you think that our $200 million worth of aid gives us some leverage, and the aid which is in the pipeline gives us some leverage to demand minimal observance of internationally accepted human rights standards by the Berisha regime?
Yes, Mr. Congressman, of course it does. And of course, if there is not a positive response, this will have very real consequences. And I think I indicated that with the statement that I made, that we are initiating a thorough review of all of our bilateral assistance programs. I agree with you on this point fully. And Congressman, I was not implying that your comments suggested isolation or self-isolation of Albania. I was merely posing that this is one extreme that we should keep in our minds as something to be avoided, that there is sort of a fairly fine line here that we have to walk. But certainly,
why is it such a fine line when we object to Albanians of Greek ancestry being beaten up, that members of opposition political parties are beaten up at election rallies? I mean, that is not a very delicate and sophisticated issue which has to be handled with kid gloves. We haven't done that in other situations of comparable scope.
Now, Congressman, I agree, and I was not implying kid gloves, or I was not implying a fine line in this particular instance. We should speak up very forcefully and very clearly on human rights abuses. And if I might say, I'm familiar with, for example, the experience you had when visiting Albania on your last trip, and I can assure you we raised this very, very forcefully.
When you raised it very forcefully following my late evening call from the Charge's residence to Deputy Secretary Strobe Talbot, which was, whenever it was, 2 months ago or longer, what has been the official response of the Berisha regime? Because I have not been advised of any response, Mr. Secretary.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had been.
No, I have not been advised.
There was a formal response provided, which in effect said that that the experience you had was not the result of any decision by the central government, that it must have been an unfortunate incident, a mistake by the policeman. I, of course, insisted, I was dealing with the Albanian ambassador, in fact, on this. I insisted that it be further investigated and that the policeman who was responsible be reprimanded, or that it be followed up on. And subsequent to that, I don't think we have gotten a response beyond that. But
well, I'm not surprised, Mr. Secretary, because accepting this response and suggesting that the policeman involved be further investigated is analogous to telling the Iraqi government that the policeman be investigated who refuses UN inspection of chemical or biological or chemical facilities, rather than recognizing that those orders come from the top. I mean, no one. I don't understand your answer, Mr. Secretary. Are you suggesting that you in the State Department believed that this was a haphazard action of an individual policeman?
no, we were not satisfied with this response.
Well, but you just said that you wanted the policeman further investigated.
Well, we wanted...
Because I find this mind-boggling.
This was their version of the story, Congressman, and we wanted them to pursue it, and we were indicating our skepticism that this version would be the case. I am merely telling you the formal response, which I am recollecting on the basis of memory, which was given to this incident. We clearly have our view of this incident, and we clearly believe that it was unacceptable, it was totally inappropriate, and it was damaging already at that time to our relationship.
But you have done nothing about it. You have done nothing about it.
We have raised it very strongly with the government, Congressman.
And you are dropping it there. That's it.
Well, it is still an open matter. We still have not gotten, I believe, a final response.
Well, let me say to you, Mr. Secretary, that such spineless behavior by the State Department is what gives the State Department so often a black eye. You simply cannot function this way. You simply cannot function this way when members of Congress are harassed on a visit to a country, when highly respected United States citizens with a valid passport are refused entry, and we are pumping huge sums of U.S. taxpayers' money to prop up the Berisha regime. It's hard enough to gain support for foreign aid when foreign aid is given to governments which are democratic and doing their utmost to observe human rights. But to give a dime to a government which functions this way, I think it's an outrage. And I find your attitude reflecting a spinelessness vis-à-vis Albania, which I find profoundly deplorable, profoundly deplorable. This is how you lose support on the Hill. This is how you lose support on the Hill.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Brina, for being with us. Did you want to put a statement, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Congressman Moran of Virginia, our colleague, is engaged in another hearing, and I would like to ask unanimous consent that his prepared statement be entered in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Lantos, and the statement will be put in the record. I want to thank Mr. Brina for being with us today. We'll now proceed to panel number 2. Bianca Jaeger is a member of the Advisory Board of Human Rights Watch and of the Executive Directors Council of Amnesty International USA for the last 20 years. Ms. Jaeger has campaigned for human rights throughout the world. She also currently serves on the Board of Directors of the Action Council for Peace in the Balkans. If our witnesses would take their seats, Gramoz Pashko is a guest scholar at the Woodrow Wilson School of Eastern European Studies, one of the founders of the Democratic Party of Albania, the first anti-communist opposition party in Albania. Mr. Pashko was twice elected to the Albanian Parliament. In 1991, he was appointed Minister of Economy and Deputy Prime Minister of Albania. In June of '92, he was expelled from the DPA and subsequently co-founded the Democratic Alliance Party. Blendi Gonsha is the Director of International Relations of the Albanian Democratic Alliance. He's also a member of the founding committee of the Democratic Party. Nicholas Gage currently serves as President of the Patriotic Federation of America, Canada, and Australia. From 1970 to 1980, Mr. Gage worked as a reporter and as a foreign correspondent for the AP, the Boston Herald Traveler, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. Mr. Gage has been a leader in the effort to assure human rights for the Greek minority living in Albania and has been an outstanding author. Shirley Cloyes is the Executive Director of the Albanian American Foundation. She's a graduate of Oberlin College and has completed graduate work at Union Theological Seminary. Ms. Cloyes has traveled frequently to Albania. Fred Abrams is a consultant for Human Rights Watch, Helsinki on the Southern Balkans. He worked in Albania from 1993 to 1994, He's the author of 2 Human Rights Watch reports, Human Rights in Post-Communist Albania and Democracy Derailed Violations in the Albanian Elections. We welcome the distinguished panelists. Each and every one of you may submit your full statement for the record or summarize them as you see fit. And we'll start with Ms. Jager. And I'm going to turn over the chair momentarily to Mr. Salmon, a member of our committee, while I have to retreat for a short visit with our delegation that's waiting me, and I'll return very briefly. Mr. Salmon.
Ms. Jagger?
Yes. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak about Albania. I was in Albania during the second round of the elections, and what I would like to emphasize here is my concern about the situation of the media in that country, because I think that we have here some very articulate spokesmen for the other issue. I just wanted to go back a little bit and speak about what Albania was in the past. Albania, and I think most of the people who are here know that they lived for nearly half a century under the most repressive communist regime in Europe, almost completely isolated from the outside world. Albania was by far, and probably is still today, the poorest country in Europe. The monolithic Albania Party of Labor, led by the dictator Enver Hoxha and his successor Ramiz Alia, ruled the country with an iron fist. Thousands of political and ideological opponents were executed, and tens of thousands of Albanians were imprisoned and tortured. In 1967, Albania became the first state to officially ban all forms of religious practice. Hoxha, beside banning religion, forbade travel and outlawed private property. He sustained his repressive system by playing on the historical fear of outside invasion, which is a fear that is used by other governments in the Balkans as well. He broke ties successively with Yugoslavia, the Soviet Union, and China, and he claimed that his self-imposed isolation was the true path to socialism. He hated the imperialist West as well as the revisionist East. He died in 1985 during the ruling of his hand-picked successor Ramiz Alia. A slight liberalization took place until 1990, when in response to the change that was taking place throughout Eastern Europe, the communist was no longer able to resist the growing opposition to communist rule at home. The government was forced to allow the formation of independent political parties, and the ban on foreign travel and religion came to an end. In December of 1990, the opposition Democratic Party was founded. There were 19 members, of which only 3 are members today. The first multi-party election in Albanian history was held in March of 1991. Everyone hoped that when communism was finally collapsed and a new government was elected in 1992, the long nightmare was going to be over. Washington believed, and I hope it was only at the time, that he had found its man in the unknown apparatchik, a physician who worked closely with Hoxha, President Sali Berisha. One thing that I would like to point out to you is that we have here among our panel two of the members of the Democratic Party Committee, Gramoš Paško and Blendi Gonja. I was very impressed when I met Mr. Blendi Gonja in Albania, because as an outsider who came to observe the elections, one of the things that struck me was this skillful manipulation of information that President Berisha has been able to achieve, but making people believe that he is the only means to attain a democracy in Albania, and that all the rest are the red front. Where here you have, and you will hear from, Mr. Blendi Gonja, who was a student, who was an instrument in bringing down the communist government and being able to make possible the transition to a democracy in Albania. Sorry?
Do you like the video now?
The video now. Yes, sure. Is there a video?
Yep. Can you put it? It's Blendi Gonja.
Okay, good. The man that you see being beaten there is Blendi Gonja, at the time when he was fighting the Communist Party.
Could you identify when and where this video took place?
Yes, Blendi? Maybe it will be more accurate.
It was on the May 28th, 2 days after the elections in Albania. We were holding a peaceful demonstration in the main square. We didn't carry...
Main square of what city?
Of Tirana. Skanderbeg Square is called.
Yes.
I was arrested a few minutes before Gonja. I saw him being dragged in front of me.
Please proceed, Ms. Bian.
So what I wanted for you to understand is how inaccurate the description of President Berisha, that he is fighting against the all-communist, because nothing is further from the truth. The people who created the Democratic Party with him have all been expelled because they opposed his policies, and because they feel that he has really turned away from the path of democracy. And whether it is in the way he has dealt with the judicial system and how he has taken total control of the judiciary, or how he has intimidated the media, or how he has carried on probably the most fraudulent elections in post-communist Europe, Eastern Europe, forgive me, comes to show you that what we have and what we are facing in Albania is really a totalitarian, the establishment of a totalitarian government. And I will now tell you a little bit about the media, because I will let my other friends to explain to you the elections, because I think it will be more appropriate that they do so. Under the communist regime in Albania, The media was primarily a means of political indoctrination. Journalists were viewed as spokespersons for the party rather than objective voices. All news was censored by the state. Albania began the process of political reform during the 1990s and 1991. Intellectuals and writers and students played an important role, publishing critical articles about the regime of Ramiz Alia, calling for democratization. In 1991, the Democratic Rebirth, the paper of the newly formed Democratic Party, and the first non-communist newspaper was founded. Many other newspapers were established in the following months. For the first time in 50 years, the country experienced an open and free press. It is common in countries which have experienced long oppressive dictatorship that newspapers remain tied to a certain political party, to a position or organizations, and that the contents tend to be at first rhetorical and polarized. It is something that I have encountered in Latin America, in many different countries, whether it is Nicaragua or El Salvador or Guatemala, where it is very difficult to have what you call an objective press. After the victory of the Democratic Party in March of '92, the lack of professionalism was used by the government of President Berisha to justify the adoption of several restrictive measures in the media. Throughout the following years until today, journalists have been imprisoned, savagely beaten, and I would like to introduce here a statement by one of the journalists and some photographs that the public and you could vision that I was able to bring out of Albania, including other photographs of other people who were beaten beside him. Journalists have been imprisoned, savagely beaten, harassed, brought to trial, have the phones and the faxes cut off, precluded from having access to email, taxed higher than alcoholic drinks or arms sales, and the papers have a newsprint tax of 25%, a 30% tax on the revenue, and a 15% tax on the advertisements. The distribution of the newspaper had been severely restricted. Furthermore, the newspapers are only delivered throughout 30% of the territory. Throughout the years of 1993 and 1994, the situation for journalists have become increasingly difficult. In November of '93, a new press law allowed a criminal proceedings to be initiated against several journalists. All of them were members of the opposition press. 5 journalists were imprisoned the following year, although not all were convicted under the new press law. In 1994, a number of violent incidents were committed against journalists by unknown assailants, just like they were against this journalist that I am presenting you, his affidavit. Nikola Lesi, publisher of Kohajon, Albanian's leading daily newspaper, had his home destroyed by a powerful bomb. In December of '95, the law of the moral character of government officials banned all collaborators with the Communist Secret Service police from working from the state media or any other newspaper with a daily circulation higher than 3,000 copies. Beside all these pressures against the press, there has been a series of specific measures to silence critical voices in the media. Cases of physical assault, imprisonment, and confiscations, all of which illustrate a consistent attempt by the Albanian government to limit freedom of expression in the country. It will be important for me to point out that the television, which is they only have one, is in the hands of the government, as well as the radio, and that the press is not allowed to have access to the email. The harassment became undoubtedly harsher before and during after the elections during the time that I was there. Many national and international reporters were savagely beaten, either by the police or by persons of the secret services. I did meet with those journalists myself. Members of the Albanian media were arbitrarily detained by the police or members of the security forces. Besides being beaten, they had their equipment and film confiscated. The persons he later identified as members of the Secret Service, according to Mr. Lala, he was beaten over the head 28 times beaten with a revolver, and his torturers fired the revolver 4 times in immediate proximity of his temples. It is believed, and I haven't had any confirmation, that he was castrated by his attackers. As a result of this abuse, Mr. Lala is currently suffering from severe depression and has not resumed his work. He has denounced his case to the office of the prosecutor. The same day, Sheptin Narsako, director of DITA, was severely beaten by a member of the security forces of the government.
Mr. Jager, if I might interrupt, if it would be possible to summarize and put your full statement in the record. And I'm going to ask our other panelists if you could be kind enough to try to limit your remarks. We do have 5 other panelists, and we have limited time, and I would like to be able to give my colleagues an opportunity to question the panels. So, Ms. Jager, if it would be possible to summarize, submit your full statement for the record, and if you do have a statement, we'd like to make copies of it for our members.
I will. I wanted to finalize by saying that I wanted to leave you with the thought that if aid will be cut to Albania, which is a dilemma that I had with Nicaragua, that maybe it will be Congressman Lantos, that maybe if it is cut from Albania, if it could go to the civil societies and to private institutions, and that will then allow the people of Albania not to be left, in this state of poverty in which they live, and take it away from the hands of the government may be a way out. The other thing that I wanted to point out is of how important I think that the support of Congress will be for these members of the press, beside the political members of the opposition parties, and I think that's why I think it's so important that you have these hearings that will send a message that you are watching over what's happening in Albania today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jager, and thank you for your concern and for your statement, and we'll make copies of the statement for our members. I'm going to resort now to our time lights. They go from the beginning to the red light, the blue light at the beginning, and for a 5-minute period. So try to be guided by our time limitations. Mr. Pashko.
Thank you, Chairman Gilman. It's my honor to speak here. And I was most glad to see Albania, my country, 2 months before the elections, being submitted to the same subcommittee for the problems prior to the elections. I was glad to see that some criticism came out from people here testifying about the process of elections in Albania. And I went to Albania most than happy because I thought my government would listen a little bit to some criticism from a friendly country and a friendly Congress. But apparently it didn't happen. So returning to Albania, campaign was very tough. Not only campaign itself, but the election day was very tough. And what happened next to the elections was very tough. Why so? I have known President Berisha since the early years of anti-communist opposition when we have been together founding the first opposition party in Albania, the Democratic Party. And I was impressed by his acute intelligence, capacity for leadership, and candor. Later on, these qualities, which made him enormously effective as an opposition leader, have been put to ill use since he became president. He became stubborn, intolerant, and ready to trample on principle when he thought his own position was threatened. More than anything, he cannot handle criticism or opposition. He has eliminated all contrary voices within his party. Out of the anti-communist movement, only 2 of the leaders of the 1990 are still with him today. I was expelled in 92 for criticizing his authoritarian habits. After expulsion, I declared, power is showing its teeth in the name of freedom and as a parliamentarian. Deputy, I feel obliged to declare the dictatorship is knocking again at the door of Albania. It was in 1992. Then he went on with Fatos Nano, the leader of the Socialist Party, which has been imprisoned since 1993. The chief judge of Albania, Zerbozi, was sacked last year, and also a few months later, Eduard Selami, the Democratic Party chairman, was fired for criticizing Berisha. During the campaign, Berisha showed that he could not accept not only criticism, but also other kind of opposition to him. His message was that I'm the only Democrat and the rest are part of the Red Front. So he wanted to present only himself as the flag of democracy. What followed the election day, I'm only going to quote a few paragraphs of the OSCE report because I don't want to appear as biased because I was running myself. At a number of polling stations, quoting OSCE report, including Tirana, Berat, and Kukës, observers saw unidentified persons and armed civilians. They were often playing an active role in the process, and locals identified them as secret police. The intimidating presence of police, still quoting, at opposition rallies, combined with police failure to prevent Democratic Party supporters from blocking roads, and thus preventing opposition supporters from attending rallies, added to the close identification of the government and its security apparatus with the ruling party. After I have a few pictures which you have in the documents about how the election process was done and how it was organized, these pictures show themselves. But let me go to some of the moments during the counting process, what did happen. In Berat, an observer team noted that turnout in one polling station was 105%. In another polling station, there were too few signatures in the voter register compared with the number of ballots in the ballot box. Extra signatures were added to the voter register in the presence of observers. In Berat, an observer team was advised to leave the polling station during the counting process. In Kukës, an observer who understands Albanian overheard the chairman of a polling station phoning somebody to apologize for not being able to deliver the required result due to the presence of international observers. Other observers noted that ballot boxes were not properly sealed, etc., etc. So, on the 28th, you saw in the video what had happened after the opposition parties decided to manifest on the street in a peaceful way and how we have been treated by the government police. I want to conclude only with one fact that up to now, I will give you my testimony, a hard copy of it. But I will tell you only one fact, that after this brutality of police you saw there, me and my colleagues, we have a call from the public attorney in Albania pending for organizing a peaceful manifestation, and those criminals, the policemen that beat us, jailed us, make Blendi Gonje drug like that, they are promoted these days in Albania. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peshko. Mr. Gage.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to applaud you and the committee for holding this hearing on human rights and democracy in Albania, because this unfortunate country is once again heading towards one-man rule, and only the strong efforts of democratic world, especially the United States, can save it from sliding back toward dictatorship. I'm here to speak about the Greek minority, but I'm equally concerned about deprivation of political rights for all Albanian citizens, because only where democratic institutions function freely and the rule of law applies equally to all citizens can any minority feel secure. What the situation is in Albania today can be seen by a few figures. In the Albanian parliament today, there are 122 members of Berisha's party in parliament out of 144 seats, and 7 from other parties. 11 are boycotting. In fact, he controls 87%. In the last elections, his party, quote unquote, won 87% of the seats, something that is impossible in any real democratic country. I don't know in history where that has ever happened, where elections were free. Berisha is so determined to maintain his lopsided version of parliamentary government that he has refused to meet with emissaries of the State Department and even members of Congress, most recently Elliot Engel, who is a member of the Albanian Issues Caucus. Today, Albania is the most repressive and least democratic nation in the post-communist world. I will leave to others, witnesses, to describe how repressive, but I want you to, as you listen to them, to keep in mind that while all citizens suffer under despotic government, those who suffer the most are the minorities. Ethnic Greeks, therefore, are the most unfortunate victim of Salis Berisha's rule. Their most immediate concern is safety. On a daily basis, their homes and businesses are robbed, their schools are burned down, their churches are desecrated by thugs, while the authorities look the other way. Even when there are fatalities, the authorities remain indifferent. This is because the ranks of police commanders and prosecutors in the southern region where most Greeks live not only have been purged of minority members, but they have been filled with officers imported from the north so that they will have no ties to the minority. The Berisha government has cleansed Greeks from all positions of power, from the police, from the judiciary, from the courts, so that the minority will feel totally helpless. Another way that they're trying to persecute the minority is to restrict the availability of education in their mother tongue. One of the first actions of the Berisha government was to shut down 7 schools that had been opened by the previous communist government. There's less Greek being taught today under a so-called democratic government in Albania than there was under the communists. A new education law theoretically expands the right of minorities to learn their mother tongue, but it leaves to the government the option of setting up restrictions. And the most Mr. Berisha has done is to insinuate that he will open the first grade of 3 schools this fall. It will take 8 years before just a primary school is established at that level. Ethnic Greeks in Albania see such actions as a message that their children will not be educated, that they are not safe, and that they should be moved south to Greece. This is a form of ethnic cleansing, subtle ethnic cleansing, nothing less. The government has also refused to return church property, and because of international pressure, they have declared, the government declared 21 houses of prayer to be part of the country's architectural heritage and transferred them to the Ministry of Culture. Of the 21 properties, 18 were Orthodox churches, 1 was a Catholic church, and 2 were mosques. This shows that the Berisha government either is especially partial to seizing Orthodox properties, or it puts very low value on the architectural merit of Catholic and Muslim edifices. I have visited Albania 5 times, and during those trips I came to understand that the troubles of the Greek minority are created by the government and not by the Albanian people. Greeks and Albanians get along extremely well with each other if they are left alone. I strongly believe there are so many bonds between Albanians and ethnic Greeks that if they are free of government pressure, both groups will join together to move the whole country forward, to take its rightful place in the family of European nations. For that to happen, however, a free press, an independent judiciary, and most of all, real democratic institutions must be allowed to develop in Albania. In the fraudulent elections of May 26, Sali Berisha demonstrated that he cares nothing about democracy, and his only concern is maintaining his own power using any means necessary. That is why the international community, led by the United States, must act together to compel Sali Berisha to hold new national elections under international supervision as soon as possible. As the Washington Post recently wrote, if we don't stand up for democracy in Albania, where are we going to do it? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gage. Our next witness is Mr. Gancha.
Thank you for giving me the chance to speak. Dear Chairman, Mr. Lantos, in December 1990, the students of Tirana marked the anniversary of the death of John Lennon at a semi-illegal gathering. We sang dozens of times that unforgettable Beatles song, Power to the People. We left the gathering halfway through and started a protest rally that sparked a nationwide movement to overthrow the rotten communist dictatorship of Ramiz Alia, the successor of Enver Hoxha. The man chosen by Alia to mediate with the students, one of whose leaders was myself, was Sali Berisha, now the president of my country. I was a member of the founding committee of the Democratic Party, which is in power in Albania today. In February 1991, 726 students went on hunger strike to demand the removal of the hated name of Enver Hoxha from Tirana University. This strike, of which I was chairman and chief negotiator, inspired the people of the capital to overthrow the halo statue of the dictator in Tirana's main square. This day has entered history as the symbolic farewell to the old regime. After 50 years of extreme isolation and tyranny, we Albanians embarked on the road to democracy with tremendous hopes. Our idealism has been generously supported by the United States and the democratic West. Now, 5 years later, this democracy has been eroded, and this support has been betrayed. The large-scale vote rigging and violence used by Berisha and the Democratic Party in the elections of May 26th this year were not entirely unexpected events. As early as late 91, Berisha's authoritarian tendencies had begun to cause concern in the democratic movement in Albania. Today, hardly any of its founders remain in Berisha's Democratic Party, which has become notorious for its corruption and intolerance of dialogue. In 1993, many of the Democratic Party's original members founded the Democratic Alliance, aiming to preserve the ideals of December. Western human rights organizations such as Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and the International Helsinki Federation have painted an increasingly black picture of human rights in Albania. The United States government has also expressed its concern, especially in the most recent annual report of the State Department. Long before polling day, it had become clear to the Albanian public that Berisha and the Democratic Party were prepared to resort to improper methods in order to remain in power. The so-called genocide law was passed specifically in order to eliminate many outstanding members of the opposition from the electoral contest. A new electoral law left the administration of the polling stations and the counting of the votes in the hand of the state. The state-controlled television glorified the ruling party and resorted to montages and falsification to cast slurs on the opposition. Many opposition rallies were banned by the police. State resources were used to plaster the streets with pro-government posters and banners, just like in the time of Enver Hoxha. I myself was a candidate for the Democratic Alliance in the constituency that included the Tirana University campus. This was a very strategic point of Mr. Berisha. I was prevented from holding any electoral meetings, even in the very hall where I led the students on their hunger strike 5 years ago. At the same time, the Democratic Party candidate held at least 18 meetings, using all the resources of the state administration, police, national intelligence service, etc. Even the university authorities promised that students who failed their exams would pass immediately if they helped the Democratic Party campaign. My own effort to hold an electoral meeting led to my arrest. The electoral rolls prepared for the May 26 elections involved many irregularities. They were published late and included fictitious names and even the names of the dead. In my constituency, 1,500 new names were mysteriously added to the electoral roll on the day before the elections. The events of May 26th have been described by many international observers, including Human Rights Watch and the International Helsinki Federation. At 11 o'clock that morning, I tried to go to the American embassy to describe what was happening. A few hundred yards from the embassy, 2 police chiefs and their bodyguard blocked the sidewalk. One of them said to me, "Will you win the elections, Blendy?" while his colleague directed the foulest insults toward me, and the bodyguard gave me a karate chop on the back of the neck. The opposition, i.e. the Socialist Party, Democratic Alliance, Social Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party of the Right, withdrew from the elections at 5 o'clock that day. Their decision was based on information coming from constituencies nationwide. They had learned that voters were being subjected to harassment, members of polling station commissions and observers were being denied their right to participate in the electoral procedures, and that their protests were being met by violence from the police. The polling stations closed at 10 p.m. By then, they were manned solely by the officers of the Democratic Party and its satellites. At 11, the Democrats were celebrating their victory with champagne and gunfire. This electoral farce led to immediate protests from the Albanian opposition internationally. On May 28, the opposition called for a protest rally in Tirana's main square. In a display of brutality in front of the cameras of the world media, riot police beat with truncheons the leaders of the opposition and dragged them to police vans. That afternoon, I returned with the protest my medal that I received from President Berisha in 1993. Since that time, many international organizations have added to the chorus of the protest. Resolutions by the Council of Europe, European Parliament, and only declarations by the United States Department have called for a repeat of the elections of 26 May. Berisha has so far turned a deaf ear and has obstinately declared that the next Albanian elections will be only in the year 2000. The leaders of the democratic movement of 1990 have seen their ideals betrayed. Unless democratic standards are restored, Albania faces a wedged future under an increasingly corrupt, authoritarian and adventurous tyranny. The Albanian opposition thanks the United States and the international community for its concern for the fate of democracy in our country. This concern is a guarantee for the efforts of the great majority of Albanians who believe that their country can become a worthy and equal partner at the common table of free peoples. We ask the United States to increase its pressure to ensure that Albania does not fall back into the darkness of dictatorship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Cloyes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to testify here. I will attempt to follow your directive to summarize the contents of my testimony and present it to you for such in its entirety.
Thank you. Full record will be received.
I want to preface my remarks by saying that in 1990, when I was publisher of Lawrence Hill Books and began the process of publishing the first and only book on the former Yugoslavia, written from the perspective of Muslim, Croatian, Serbian, and Macedonian anti-war journalists, I had little knowledge of the history of Albania and none at all of the role that it played and still plays in the Balkan conflict. It was former Congressman Joseph DioGuardi and the board of the Albanian American Civic League who described to me in vivid detail a Tirana of just a few years ago, in which citizens wearing nearly identical suits moved furtively through the main square, where now, as I have witnessed, a multitude passes and mingles daily. A Tirana in which only government officials were allowed to own cars, where now hundreds of automobiles traverse the streets. A Tirana in which there was almost no commercial activity amid an absolutely threadbare existence, in which now, as I have witnessed, free enterprise is flourishing along with foreign investment. In addition to the fairly extensive academic research that I have conducted in relation to Albania since 1991, I have heard numerous personal accounts from Albanians, from Vlora to Durrës, from Shkodra to Tirana, and in the diaspora, from Titova to New York City, of the barbarous treatment that Albanians suffered for 50 years at the hands of communist dictator Enver Hoxha. I never knew that Albania, the Albania that prior to the collapse of communism had cut off all of its communication with the rest of the world and was quite typically referred to as a prison without walls. However, since 1993, I have met the survivors of the old Albania and made 3 trips there, including a delegation joining with Congressman Gilman, who was en route from Athens to Tirana to discuss Greek-Albanian relations with President Sali Berisha. This was in August of 1995. I know the face of the new Albania, and nothing including the recent elections, has altered my belief that Albania's movement from the most brutally repressive and centralized communist regime in Europe to a nascent democratic society in the space of only 4 years is an astonishing accomplishment worthy of our respect and, much more important, to our support. It is also the case that nothing has served to dispel my concern about the glaring contradictions between American and Western responses to Albania and the 3.5 million Albanians who reside outside its borders and the rest of the region. The May 1996 elections were far from unblemished, and I am not here, I assure you, to argue otherwise. But I am here to place the elections and their aftermath in a context that hopefully will help move us from political expediency to justice in our dealings with Albania and the Balkans. For 50 years, there was no consistent or considerable outcry against the ferocious totalitarianism of the Hoxha regime. Where was the world's indignation when Albanians lived on the brink of starvation in a constant state of fear? Since the collapse of that regime 5 years ago, Albania, with minimal support and recognition for making a peaceful transition to a democratic state and for undergoing a thorough restructuring of its economy, has groped into the late 20th century. Why have we been so sparing in our response to this transformation? Why have we rushed to the judgment? I'm not talking about people in this room. I'm talking about our media. I'm talking about some of our government. I'm talking about the West. Why have we rushed to the judgment that in view of the May elections, Albania must now be isolated, expelled from the Council of Europe, and subject to economic sanctions? Why do we want to undermine a democratic regime that is attempting to get a devastated country on its feet? In the orchestrated condemnation of Albania that ensued after the parliamentary elections, little mention was made of Albania's history and the country's tremendous fear of a return to communism. Almost not a word was uttered about the not insubstantial attempts by freelance operatives to unseat the Berisha government. No acknowledgement was made of the enormous pressure that the Albanian government is undergoing in its attempts to keep the Albanian populations just outside its borders from exploding from oppression and repression at the hands of Slavic regimes. No credit was given to the Berisha government for the abiding cooperation that it has given the United States in our efforts to prevent a spillover of the war in Bosnia and the destabilization of the southern Balkans. For example, while the Macedonian government was busy denying the rights of the huge Albanian population in that country, Albanian President Berisha was cooperating with our foreign policy directives by aiding that fragile regime to overcome the Greek blockade. In August 1995, I interviewed the heads of all the political parties in Albania and had wide-ranging discussions with government officials and professionals in many fields about the impact of the referendum on the Constitution, the progress of land reform and economic development, and the status of the press and the judiciary. It was clear to me then that while more progress indeed has to be made to make Albania a full-fledged democracy, the socialists would be readily defeated. When the world denounced Albania for instances of election fraud on May 26, 1996, scant attention was paid to the fact that the socialists, in a transparent effort to discredit the parliamentary elections, withdrew from them hours before the polls closed. The events the next day, when the police overreacted to a socialist demonstration that was conducted without a permit, were deftly used by the former communists to play to the Western press. This is apart from what we've seen happen to 7 of the demonstrators. Parenthetically, these were the very same people who, under the former communist regime of Ramiz Alia, caused the death of 12 people in 1991 when Berisha's newly formed Democratic Party challenged the communists in the first open elections in Albania. Ironically, most of the West declared those elections free and fair. It should also be noted, I believe, that the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly issued a press release on May 27 stating that the delegation believed that Albanian legislation does provide a basis for free and fair elections and for the will of the people to be expressed. They also acknowledged that the media performed well in informing voters about the electoral process. Berisha complied with their recommendation to hold another round of elections in certain districts. Once again, the socialists abstained from participating, commanded international press attention. While the violence that wounded 7 people in the first round was not repeated, the massive negative press about Albania led to immediate repercussions for the Albanians in Kosovo, where the police roundups intensified, and for the Albanians in Macedonia, where the founders of the private Albanian language University of Tetovo were seized and jailed for 1 year. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I cannot conclude without commenting on the hearing conducted in June by the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, which to my dismay is to some extent being replayed here. I was astonished to see in June that what should have been a forum, in my opinion, for the U.S. Congress to shed light on Albania and the May elections instead became a platform for individual operatives deeply tied to part of the Greek-American lobby who have been using the controversy surrounding the Albanian elections to gain support for their personal ambitions and political objectives, especially in southern Albania. It goes without saying that unresolved problems related to the ethnic minorities in both Greece and Albania are legitimate topics of inquiry that should be aired publicly. But it appears to us and to the Albanian American community highly irregular and inappropriate for a congressional hearing on the Albanian elections to be used for this purpose. In addition, the integrity of the hearings was undermined by the choice of panelists who remain on one side. The only Albanian chosen to testify, Mr. Pashko, was a well-known former communist who has opposed Sali Berisha from the beginning in his own quest for power, and who has little or no following among democratic forces in Albania or in the diaspora. And on the other hand, Nicholas Gage, who is with us today, a highly visible Greek-American spokesman, who in fact does not represent the Greek government or the majority of Greek Americans, has been outspoken about his desire for the overthrow of the Berisha government. I hope that this is the direction we're not going to go in if we are truly invested in peace for the Balkans, and for which so many people have given their lives. I hope that we will finally address what has not been addressed at the Dayton Accords, that if we want to prevent the spread of extreme ultranationalism, the end of democracy, and the continuation of genocide in Europe, then I hope finally we will address the Albanian question in its entirety that lies at the heart of the Balkan conflict. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cloyes. Mr. Abram.
Congressman Gilman, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here to speak today. I've just returned from a research trip to the area of the Balkans inhabited primarily by Albanians, namely Western Macedonia, Kosovo, and Albania itself. My findings confirm that ethnic Albanians face daily discrimination in Macedonia and Kosovo, both of which deserve congressional hearings of their own. At the same time, the trip stiffened my resolve to document and publicize the human rights violations that are taking place in Albania itself. The current situation in Albania is well illustrated by the case of 27 intellectuals who signed a memorandum to Western governments on June 9th. In their appeal, they pleaded for the West to support democratization in their country since, quote, the electoral farce of May 26 is taking Albania on the final steps toward the restoration of a dictatorship. The veracity of their statement may be a matter for debate, but surely we agree that every individual has the right to express such views in public without fear of retribution. Albania's law on fundamental rights and freedoms also protects the right to free speech. Unfortunately, such laws are not respected. The signatories of the memorandum and their families were attacked in the state-run media for being spies and communists. Some received harassing phone calls, while others were threatened with losing their jobs. The case is not extreme, but very typical. Since coming to power in 1992, President Berisha and his ruling Democratic Party have systematically turned against those with views different from the state. Critics of the Democratic Party were considered enemies of democracy or, by deduction, friends of communism. President Berisha utilized Albanians' fear of a return to the past to justify the elimination of his rivals. As a result, the executive power is firmly in the control of the media, the judiciary, and, after these elections, the parliament. The 27 intellectuals are a light example, but others, like journalist Bardok Lalo, were not so lucky. 2 days after the elections, he was hauled off in a secret police van, badly beaten, and left for dead in a Tirana lake. Members of parliament, opposition activists, and even foreign journalists have suffered similar abuse. Despite acknowledging irregularities in 17 electoral zones, the Albanian government has still not identified those who violated the law. 7 policemen were allegedly punished for the beatings that took place on May 27th, I believe it's May 28th, in Skenderbeg Square. But according to sources at the Interior Ministry, 1 was fired while the others have only been transferred. Meanwhile, a court case has been opened against the opposition members who organized the rally and were beaten. When I was in Tirana last month, the phone lines at the Socialist Party headquarters had been cut since the elections. The largest daily newspaper, Kohajon, and the main human rights organization, the Albanian Helsinki Committee, were experiencing similar technical difficulties. The media is still strongly controlled by the state, which keeps the population from obtaining a balanced picture of the situation. There are many private newspapers, but they are restricted by repressive press law and obstacles to their distribution. Since 1992, a large number of journalists, including foreign correspondents, have been harassed, arrested, or beaten after writing articles that were critical of the state. The key is television and radio, which are strongly controlled by the government. Even the largest daily newspaper, with a circulation of 50,000, cannot compete with the biased television news which reaches every home. After much delay, Parliament is about to review a law that will legalize private television and radio. But according to the current draft, licenses to broadcast countrywide programs require the approval of the Prime Minister. Article 4 of the draft law guarantees the opening of radio and television programs when they, quote, protect the national character. The status of the Greek minority has been a prominent issue in Congress of late. While I do not deny that some problems exist, in general, the problems of the Greek minority are related to the problems of democracy in Albania as a whole, and should not be viewed solely in their ethnic context. The truly endangered minority in Albania is reform-minded Democrats, whether they are ethnic Greeks or Albanians, and attempts to stress wide-scale ethnic discrimination are, in my opinion, an exaggeration. The problem now is to put democracy back on track in Albania. The opposition parties are gradually falling apart, while the Democratic Party is consolidating power. I do not doubt that Albania will soon be facing a one-party state. For this, the international community is partly to blame. Albania has a long history of strong leaders, from Enver Hoxha to King Zog, and I believe the West encouraged Berisha's autocratic tendencies by consistently lending its unqualified support to the Democratic Party, despite obvious signs that human rights abuses were taking place. And in closing, working for dialogue among the political forces in Albania is indeed an important step. But calling for dialogue assumes that all parties are interested in sitting down at the table, and this is an assumption that I don't think we can make. One positive move would be for the international community to state unequivocally that it does not respect the outcome of this fraudulent vote.
Thank you, Mr. Abrams, and I want to thank all of our panelists. We're going to be called to the floor for vote, but I'm going to ask my colleagues if they would restrict themselves to 1 or 2 questions so we can move toward closing up our hearing. Mr. Lantos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to commend all of our witnesses. I just have a couple of very brief questions. Ms. Cloyes, you are quite correct in saying that Albania had a despicable police state for 2 generations, which isolated the country and subjected the population to horrendous dictatorial conditions. The issue that we are concerned with is not that conditions are better today than they were under Hoxha and Ramiz Alia. That's self-evident. What we are concerned with is that the communist empire collapsed in Europe, including Albania, and we are appalled at the return of a dictatorial one-party regime to a small country which the United States is supporting with enormous generosity. That is the issue. We did not give $200 million to Enver Hoxha in a brief period of time, or to Ramiz Alia. We had no relations with them, and they didn't receive 1 dime of American taxpayer money. What they are now receiving is huge assistance paid for by American taxpayers, and we insist here and elsewhere that the recipient governments maintain internationally acceptable human rights standards and not re-establish a one-party dictatorship. I only have one brief question. You talked about your visits to Tirana, which I listened to with great interest. Did you visit the southern part of Albania where the Greek ethnic community lives?
I have only, the southernmost point of Albania that I visited is Vlorë, which is in the south. I have not made an extensive trip through the Greek regions. I have read extensively, including Max van der Stoel's, the High Commissioner of Refugees on Minority Status, report of the situation for Greeks in southern Albania, as well as the situation of the 3 million Albanians in Greece, something that I hope will begin to have parity in the discussion about this issue. And I would hope very much that perhaps the Congress could encourage a delegation, both congressional and private citizens, to both areas to finally resolve this problem, because I see very, very disparate and contradictory reports from human rights officials about what's going on and what some people have stated here today.
Mm-hmm. How much time did you spend in southern Albania?
I only was in southern Albania for 1 week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lantos. Mr. Payne? Mr. Payne, could you limit it to one question, if you would, so we can wind up?
Well, because the time is late, I won't even ask a question, just to say that certainly commend you for calling the hearing, and I think that the issues of this nature, which tend to be complicated, many times opinionated by virtue of who's reporting, the only way that we're really going to try to find the truth is by having continued dialogue like this, and also for us to take the time to visit the region and spend time and talk to all parties. And it is difficult when new democracies, the whole democracy is very difficult. It's not easy to do. We find in areas where democracy has been installed, we see increase in crime, we see increase in a lot of things that are negative that were not there previously because of dictatorial regimes. So democracy is not easy. It's a tough thing to do. I think we should strive for trying to improve the quality of life of people, and so I'm here to listen and to learn, and I'm going to study the issue much more thoroughly, and hopefully we can get an opportunity to visit the region.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the defenders of the Albanian government suggest that by us condemning the election, criticizing the election procedures, and of course all of the very important information we got today, that inadvertently we would be strengthening the Socialist Party, which they suggest consists largely of unreconstructed ex-communists. I want to get some feedback from that, because invariably there is a law of unintended consequences that operates in almost all of our foreign policy. That was the one question I wanted to ask. The second was that the impact of this treaty that was just ratified between Greece and the Albanian government. There's a lot of good words here, I'm sure a lot of sincere intentions, and I would like to know what impact that treaty between the Greek and Albanian governments might have on many of the situations that we've discussed today.
And if our panelists could limit their statements, we have 5 minutes left for the remainder of the hearing. Please, who would like to respond? Mr. Pashka.
May I respond to the first question, because for the second one I'm not a specialist. I don't know how much it's going to get the Greek minority, this treaty between the two governments. The problem is that it has been speculated too much about a communist revival. I'm blamed to be a communist, but nobody is blaming, even in this panel, nobody is blaming those people that beat me up, arrested me, jailed me. I don't know, because I was a communist or what. Now, the problem is that in Albania, of course, the major opposition, like in all former communist countries, the major opposition is coming from communists, former communists reformed, etc. And that there is still a gap or this party is under restructuring. We cannot say that the socialists are exactly the same communists as the old days, but we can even not say that they are completely reformed one, Western-oriented. But there are also other opposition parties in Albania, which is, for instance, the party I represent, the Democratic Alliance. We have been co-founders with Berisha of the first anti-communist opposition. Our group split from that, and we have been working to form a group of the center, not communist, but also not against the right wing. We have been against the right wing in the same time. And these elections, let's say, erased also this opposition, this non- or anti-communist opposition which was formed in Albania.
Thank you. Mr. Congressman, I don't think that the United States has to choose between communism and tyranny in Albania. It should stand up for democracy and free elections, free press, independent judiciary. And that is the role that we should play as the champions of democracy in the world. I think if we support real democracy in Albania, democratic parties and democratic institutions will emerge and build the kind of country that all Albanians want. In terms of the treaty between Greece and the United States, it wasn't exactly a treaty. It was several agreements. One legalized.
They call it a treaty here. I use the word treaty because they use the word treaty.
One to legalize the workers that come in every year from Albania and Greece, a certain number of them. I think it's 300,000. And the other was to allow some rights to improve the conditions of the Greek minority. The major contribution from Mr. Berisha's government was to announce that he would allow the establishment of 3 schools and the first grade of 3 schools, which means that it will take at least 8 years just for a full grammar school to be established. The Greek government, I think, took that crumb because more was not offered, but it does not end the problems of the Greek minority in southern Albania.
I'm getting the cut sign here from the chairman. We're going to miss a vote, I'm afraid, if we don't conclude this hearing now. Thank you.
I want to thank our panelists. We may want to submit some questions in writing, which we'd ask you to reply as quickly as possible so we can make it part of the record. If there are any materials you'd like to submit for the record, yes, please do, and we'll be pleased to make it part of the record. Mr. Valaj, please note we have your statement. We'll make that part of the record as well. I'm sorry that we don't have time for any statements. Committee stands adjourned.
Anybody can open any school they want. But the big government doesn't permit it. Anybody can open any private school. It's a free democracy. You can open up a school. You want to open a school. What you talking about 50,000 minority, Greek minority in Albania, you're calling all the Orthodox Greeks. What 400,000? All the Orthodox, Albanian Orthodox are Greek.
Why don't you hold a census and find out exactly how many they have? Why not have a census?
You falsify.
I didn't think he was going to make any.
It was not a statement. The hearings was the Albanian elections. Jim, there's nothing in the treaty between the agreements between...
I know, he wanted to get it to see
what is it on check?
He was trying to see what the reaction was.
The reaction was when Mr. Lamia was talking. The reaction was there was no democratic election, there was the problem, and that you were looking for a trial.
I know, I tried to, but you got about 10 seconds.
It's just...
trying to get him. I told him, I said...
You shouldn't say anything. Everything else you shouldn't say anything.
I said, look, we talked a lot about the elections, now get into something else. I said, get into the Greek.
The most important thing is the election. That's the most important thing. The $200 million that it takes to stabilize himself. Then he's beating and he's destroying every opposition party. That's not democracy.
You're right.
This is what the hearings are about. That was not the Greek school in the Greek Danube.
No, they said it was about you just said human rights.
Human rights, yes. Human rights, not the Greeks alone. Not the Greek human rights. There was human rights in the Albania. There was no...
Yeah, but the Greek, you know, the Greek.
Fundamental thing was